Welcome to another episode of The Lord's Delight. So, for the past few episodes, what I have been doing is looking at certain relationships that we have today and sort of compare them to similar relationship that existed in the Bible. So, in that trend, today I want to talk about a relationship between a worker and the employer. This is something that is so different in today's world, and people talk about company culture, and some companies want individuality for the employees. It's a different. So I want to take two people from the Bible and I want to look at what their relationship was to their employer. And both their employers were not like of the same faith as the employees. So it definitely did lead to a lot of friction, and we are going to see how they handled it. But I do want to give a disclaimer before I get started on this. The two people that I'm going to talk about are Daniel and Joseph. Yes, Joseph was sold as a slave to the people in the Egypt, and Daniel was as a teen was on exile from his land, and he was a slave taken into Babylon. But the one thing that I want to tell you is I'm not looking at these relationships with their employers as slaves, because at a certain point in time they both acquired power and authority. And we see that Joseph rose as second in the nation and Daniel also had power. So I am looking at from that point onwards when they had power and authority, not when they were slaves under like complete power of somebody else. I'm talking about the phase where they actually rose to power and had authority, but they were employed by these different kings. So let's dive in. The first person I want to look at is Daniel. And Daniel was like the administrator over 120 satraps who ruled over the kingdom, along with two more people. So the three people who took care of the 120 administrators who were ruling throughout the kingdom, and he was on top of them, one of the three, and who reported to King Darius. And these satraps under Daniel were made accountable so that the king will not suffer any loss, and they took care of the administrative part of it. And you can see in Daniel chapter 6 verse 3, it says, Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. That comes with a lot of power, and you know what it did? It also made the other administrators and satraps jealous of him, and they did not want that. Do we not face such situations in today's world? When you are being promoted or like being looked upon with favor, some people don't like it. And you know what these people try to do? Backstab. And look at verse 4. They try to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. So this is something that we need to learn as employees. I am also going to go into the workforce soon, probably in a couple of years. What we need to be is, we shouldn't be corrupt and we should not be negligent. So pray for wisdom in your work, and that God will give you discernment on how to go about doing your tasks. And so these men, you know what they tried to do? They tried to accuse his beliefs. So they went to the king and they designed a situation telling him, you need to decree saying nobody should pray to any god or human being in the next 30 days except to you. If a person did that, they'll be thrown into lion's den. And they created a situation for when they knew Daniel would pray and would be in violation of this law or rule. And so they anticipated and created a situation so where Daniel will get in trouble. But you know what happened? Daniel did get in trouble, but they also tried to malign him a little bit to the king and said in verse 13 of chapter 6, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. They start with personal accusation of his character, and then telling the king that, oh, he pays no attention to you. See, he doesn't even obey what you did. But Daniel did not give up his beliefs even when he knew the king's decree was against it. And in the end, we all know what happened, right? He was thrown in the lion's den. And the next morning, the king, who was not able to sleep the whole night, in verse 19, goes and asks him, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Darius himself is not a believer, but he understands and sees in Daniel the kind of God he worships is what drives the behavior of Daniel. Are we able to portray that wherever we are placed, workplace, college, based on our behavior? That is the first thing. And because of what Daniel's behavior was, you see the king's response, and that decree was the people should fear and revere the God of Daniel. It says so in verse 26 of chapter 6. Daniel's behavior with his principles and with his excellence at work drove the king to write that decree. Okay, let's go to the next guy, which is Joseph. Joseph rose to power, which is described pretty much in Genesis 41. If you read through, you'll be able to see that. And if you read verse 37, it says, so the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. So you see, Pharaoh testifies to his servants saying, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Pharaoh sees that in Joseph. And he also tells Joseph directly, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And he says to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt, and then gives him the ring, the cloth, and the chain, and made him ride in the second chariot. This is the thing. So this was in result of how Joseph interpreted the dream, and he also gave advice to the king on how to handle the 7 years of famine that comes after the 7 years of fertile production of the land. And when Joseph was put in charge of taking care of collection of grain, he was also diligent in that. He was not negligent, and his discernment and wisdom came from God. And he was able to even provide grain to his own family. The second part of that is when his own family came, yes, Joseph did not reveal himself to them immediately, but he also did not take revenge on them with respect to abuse of authority or power that he had. If he had put them in jail, nobody would have questioned him because he had that much power. But finally, he revealed himself to them and made provision for them to be taken care of, even though he was harmed by his brothers. And he says this, you intended it for harm, but God intended it for good. So at workplace, we need to understand that any harm that we perceive or any put down, whatever is intended for our bad, will turn around for good when God is in there. That is all we need to remember. So these are some of the things that I wanted to talk about with respect to employer-employee relationship. So think about what at your workplace makes you stand apart because of your beliefs. What makes you reflect the values that you say you have and you believe and that you want to work with? Like, how is that displayed at your workplace? That is all I wanted to ask today, and we'll see with another relationship comparison next week. Bye, guys.